I spent my senior year of high school in Denver, Colorado, mainly because I had plans to begin my college studies at the University of Denver. However, things did not work out as I had hoped, and due to financial problems, I was forced to return home to my family in my native Alaska. I was born and raised in the city of Anchorage, which is the largest and most populated city in the state. So since my little plan to do my college degree in Denver would not be possible, I still had the option to enroll in the local University of Anchorage. That's why as soon as the academic year was over, my older sister, who lives in the Yukon state in Canada, offered to pick me up for a road trip through that country before re-entering the United States on the Alaskan side and taking me back home. The first day was great, as my sister and I stopped here and there to do some shopping in some larger Canadian cities. We made a point of traveling mostly during daylight hours for safety and alternated driving, so during the early mornings and evenings my sister usually drove. My sister had eye surgery about 7 months or so before all this, so her eyesight tends not to be as good at night. So on the third night on the road, we decided it was best to head back home to Whitehorse. Things were going well, but we were a little behind schedule, and it was getting dark faster than it would further south, so we had to hurry. I told my sister to let me drive this leg, so she wouldn't have to strain her eyesight, and she agreed. However, somewhere after the junction of some road, we ended up with this complete moron following us with his high beams on full blast. This made me very angry because not only was he blinding me, but he was already going almost 10 kilometers over the speed limit, so I moved to the side of the road and slowed down myself, waiting for the guy to pass me. It's worth noting that this was a one-lane, two-way road with almost no traffic, but even though I basically moved out of the way and waited for him to pass in front of me, he didn't. Instead, he started to mimic my movements, staying right behind my car even when I was almost off the road. Okay, this is weird, I thought. Suddenly, I start to feel this heavy, cold feeling in the pit of my stomach. My sister starts to get desperate and panic. She's always been high-strung, and as I said before, the woman is half-blind, so she couldn't help guide me down the road. But it didn't really matter, because just the same, the jerk's high beams were so bright they would blind anyone, no matter how good their eyesight was. At this point, I was having a pretty hard time making out anything in my mirrors. Unfortunately, I couldn't get the make and model of a vehicle that was following us, let alone the license plate number or anything about the driver. It just appeared to be a large car, like a pickup truck or something. All this went on for a long way. The guy was following me closely with his lights on full blast, but he wasn't finishing passing me. I started to lower the speed limit, thinking, well, if he wants to speed up, let him pass me already. But I still had the feeling that something was out of place. This was not normal. This guy, or whoever he was, seemed to be following us and bothering us with his lights for some reason. I was beginning to feel that this was truly intentional. The chase continued for several miles, even as other people passed by and flashed their high beams at this guy. At that point, we were maybe 10 miles or so from the next town, but that's when things escalated even more. As we approached civilization, my sister, already a nervous wreck, said to me, "Speed up and lose it quick." I nodded and did exactly as she said, but the driver suddenly accelerated as well, as if he sensed that I was now running away from him and simply wanted to stop him. The guy started accelerating again, but this time he didn't just follow us closely, he rammed us. He tried to ram us from the rear driver's side, but luckily I was able to anticipate his move and accelerated in time to prevent him from hitting me and eventually running me off the road. While all this was going on, my sister was desperately trying to get the phone to make a call to emergency services, and when she was finally able to find it, unfortunately none of her phones had a signal. Even though we have a local operator, the service was terrible. He was now considerably over the speed limit. I was at least 30 kilometers per hour over the speed limit. It was then that I heard the loud sound of the engine behind me revving up, and the next instant, a whirring sound rushes past us, and immediately I see the huge pickup crossing the road in front of us, forcing me to dig my feet into the brakes with a jolt, making the car shudder. I was in complete shock. In the passenger seat, my sister is screaming desperately, but I barely noticed it at that moment, because in front of me, I could see that there were two people on board the van, which I could now make out was black, and although I don't really know what model it was, I do know that it was very big. After that, I'm not entirely sure what happened because the adrenaline acted for me. The only thing I remember is that I put it in reverse and stepped on the accelerator full throttle without even realizing who might be behind me. I backed up for a few meters, and then I made the craziest and most dangerous maneuver of my entire life as a driver. I hit the brakes again, and then put the car in drive. Then I stepped on the accelerator, making the tires squeal, and while my sister looked at me with a horrified face, I pretended to ram the truck, but instead I left the road and passed it on the side a millimeter away. Obviously, the car shuddered, and for a moment I even thought we would spin. But for some miraculous reason, I managed to straighten the steering wheel and maintain control, so I kept driving at full speed until I reached the town. I looked back several times along the way and realized that they were no longer following us. Probably realizing that we were already in the populated area, they simply decided to turn back or take another road. While we were in the car, my sister and I debated whether to go to the police or not, but finally decided to go, so we arrived at the nearest station and told the officers what we had just experienced. I gave them the outline of the van and the people inside. While I could not make them out clearly, I know they were two men, one with blonde hair and the other with dark hair, but unfortunately that was all I could see. After making our report, my sister and I drove on until we reached her house, which was not far away. But we were nervous the whole time, frantically checking the mirrors every inch of the way. Fortunately, that was the only unpleasant incident during the whole trip. After that, we concluded our journey in complete normality. But we never knew who the guys on board that van were or what they wanted, as the police never arrested them, as far as we know. My brother and I spent our entire childhood and adolescence on a lonely Alaskan island. There were 4 of us in our family: my parents, my older brother Tiago, who lived with Patau syndrome, and I. He attended a special class at school, where he shared space with other children who, like him, needed extra support. Some had difficulty learning certain subjects, while others faced emotional challenges. Despite their differences, all the children at the school loved my brother very much and treated him with affection. Our family house had been our home since we were born. It was a 2-story structure. On the first floor, in addition to common areas such as the living room and dining room, we had a boiler room, a large storage room, and a bathroom. A peculiarity of our house was a plywood-paneled wall that allowed us to run cables to our workshop, which we accessed through a C-shaped pathway. Our access space was, in essence, a small rainwater tank. 2 large tanks occupied most of this 10 by 15-foot space, which was barely high enough to bend over. To access them, we had to lift a heavy lid. This space, entered only through a small side door of our house, also served as a storage area. Right next door, in a fenced-in area with its own kennel, lived Bobby, our faithful Labrador Weimaraner. His deep barking, especially during the hot summer months, alerted us to the presence of black bears approaching our garden. Bobby was our guardian, a 130-pound giant with an even bigger heart. One day, a boy of about 16, a native of the area, knocked on our door asking for Tiago. We were very surprised because Tiago, with his difficulties, preferred to watch the kids play rather than join them. But this boy, who introduced himself as Michael, said that they had been classmates and that he used to spend time with my brother and play with him. However, Tiago's body language told us otherwise. He seemed uncomfortable at the time, and that aroused some suspicion in us. We let Michael in, but it was soon evident that they did not share the same interests. I remember the boy looking at me too much, and he didn't seem like someone who had any kind of bond with my brother. My mother went to the kitchen, but before she did, she motioned for me to keep an eye on him, and I did. After a while, it became apparent that Tiago didn't want him there, so my mom told Michael that we would be eating dinner soon and let him know that it was time for him to leave. After that, my mom, who was always very careful with us, discovered that the boy had moved in with his parents in the area, but was still a bit far away. He had been in and out of foster care most of his life, and his parents were abusive addicts. Then I think he came in another time, and my mom felt bad for him, but she had a sense that something was wrong. She felt he wasn't coming for my brother, so I politely told him that Tiago really didn't like having visitors. He seemed okay with that and never came again. Every Monday night, my parents would leave home for a couple of hours to go to the church service at the local church. During that time, I would stay home alone with Tiago. I started helping in the church nursery when I was 9 years old, and when I turned 11, my best friends and I took a babysitting course that included CPR and first aid. We babysat together, and when I was 12, I started babysitting on my own. My mom was a stay-at-home mom and was always with us except during Monday church services. My parents didn't drink, use drugs, or smoke. I only remember my parents leaving the house once or twice, and it was only then that we needed a babysitter. But as I grew older, it was no longer necessary. On service days, I would leave the downstairs door open for my parents, since they were only going to be gone for a couple of hours, never taking longer than that. It had only been about 30 minutes since they left, so I was surprised when I heard the downstairs door open and thought I must have heard the car stop. Tiago was well past his bedtime, so I quietly went upstairs to carry my brother upstairs to his room so he could fall asleep in bed. I left my brother in his room and began to hear footsteps in the living room, and then they stopped at the edge of the stairs. I left the room and walked down the hallway to go downstairs while asking my parents from upstairs what had happened so they would be back so soon. But when I got to the edge of the stairs, I looked down and saw a pair of men's boots and jeans. That was all I could see from the top of the stairs. Because of the way they were arranged, you could only see the bottom of whoever was standing at the bottom, but that was enough for me to realize that wasn't my father. I started to get nervous because at this hour I couldn't think of anyone who could come to our house, much less break in without knocking on the door first. My first instinct was to run down the hallway, and when I turned around I realized that Tiago was coming in my direction, so I grabbed him by the hand and dragged him to my parents' room, which was the only one with a lock. But not only that, there was also a phone and a couple of my dad's rifles in there. While my heart was beating a mile a minute, I struggled with my brother to accompany me to my parents' room at the end of the hall. Tiago is very stubborn and was resisting going with me. He just wanted to go to his own room, and while his mind is that of a little boy, he was 16 and older than me, so I had to convince him to go into my parents' room by telling him there would be treats for him. Obviously, once he got there and saw that I had lied to him, he was upset and didn't want to stay in. But I managed to get him to sit on the bed while I grabbed a gun and picked up the phone to call my neighbors and alert them of the intruder in my house. At that point, I was very nervous and couldn't connect the wires in my head to look up my neighbor's number in the directory. My nerves were making me absolutely clumsy, and as I was struggling with myself to be able to call for help, I heard the intruder walking around the bottom of the house. Our floor was hardwood, so you could hear every step clearly. Finally, I came out of my state of mental block and managed to call my neighbor, and to my good fortune, he didn't take too long to answer his phone. I was afraid he would tell me to go out on the front porch and that the person was still there, but he just got really alarmed and immediately said he was on his way out to my house. I waited a few minutes and kept an eye out for footsteps in the living room, but at one point I stopped hearing them, so I thought maybe the intruder was gone. At one point I plucked up my courage, grabbed my father's file, ran to the front door and went out. Fortunately, the neighbor arrived in a jiffy and at that moment was already in our driveway with his weaponry in hand. I immediately let him in, and together we began to search the second floor of the house. I told my neighbor that I hadn't heard any doors open, but I wasn't sure if he had climbed out of a window or maybe he was hiding in some corner of the house. In a matter of seconds, he disappeared from my sight, but quickly returned and told me that the doors were locked and there didn't seem to be any windows open, so he hurried up the stairs to the second floor. But that's when we heard the door downstairs open quickly and then slam shut as the intruder ran out the driveway. My neighbor rushed out, ran up to the entrance and immediately fired a shot in the air. As we stood there, we noticed the person running wildly into the woods. After about 10 minutes, I felt calmer, and our neighbor sat with us until my parents came home. They never called the police because I think my parents assumed it was a neighbor playing with me, and we lived in a safe place where you only had to worry about bears and wolves occasionally. A week after this incident, we went to bed one night at the same time as usual, but about 15 minutes later, our dog started barking. We looked through the windows, but nothing could be seen. Usually when Bobby barked, it was because there was a bear nearby. It was spring and Bobby was probably getting used to them again. However, these barks persisted almost every night since then. It was very strange, but Bobby was old and we thought maybe he was starting to suffer from senile dog dementia or something, because it was too weird that he would always bark at the same time and after an hour or two, he would just shut up and be like nothing. It was kind of like a pattern, but we just looked for that explanation and didn't give it much importance. But even a couple of months later, the barking was still happening. One night I asked my best friend to stay the night. She and I used to have sleepovers often, sometimes at her house and sometimes at mine. But whenever we did it at my house, we always stayed downstairs so we could make more noise and stay up as late as we wanted. Katerine had a sister who was 8 years older, and we asked her if she could bring us some drinks. I know we were young, but that was the norm in our town. We kids would start drinking, smoking, and doing other things in high school due to boredom. With few entertainment options and the overwhelming feeling of isolation here, many of us teenagers were drawn to these behaviors as a rebellious way of escaping the monotonous life of our little island in the middle of nowhere. I think it had been raining for most of the year, so we were inside the house for a long time. It was a little after midnight, and his sister never showed up, and oddly enough, Bobby hadn't barked. We were sitting on the stairs combing our hair, and we both had the feeling that someone was watching us. Bobby had started barking just a moment ago. My friend and I looked at each other for a moment without saying anything, but somehow we both knew what the other was thinking. We went down 2 steps and discreetly peeked out the window, and that's when we saw a silhouette standing there. We ran up the stairs to the second floor, trembling with fear. We thought maybe it was her sister, but she wouldn't have come to the window to spy on us, and the face there looked too dark to be hers. We had the lights on downstairs, and there were no lights by that window outside, so it was hard to tell who it was. We didn't want to wake my parents in case it was his sister. We waited 1 hour and went back downstairs to get our stuff, and then went to sleep in my room. The next morning, we talked to my friend's sister, and it wasn't her. This gave us a slight chill because, foolishly, we thought we had seen a ghost. A week later, I woke up to hear Bobby barking frantically. I look out the window and see a person running out the driveway into the yard. I thought about waking my parents, but we had a path on the side of the house that the kids used to get to the road behind us. The neighborhood was on the side of the mountain, so all the kids used other paths to go directly to another street instead of using the main roads. I had never seen anyone go out the other side of the driveway because the path was on the south side of the house, along with Bobby's crawl space and living area. My room was the only one on the north side. At that point, I decided to leave my room and walk around to see once and for all who was out there. So I put on my coat and went out the side door, trying not to make any noise. I walked carefully, skirted around the house, and hid behind the wall of the shed. And that's when I saw him. It was the same boy who used to come home to see Tiago. He was climbing up a ladder that was next to my bedroom window, which my father had arranged a few months earlier to fix some damage on that side of the roof. But that's not even the scariest part. But when I detailed him, I realized he was wearing a jean and the same boots I had seen that night when the intruder entered my house. At that moment, I froze. I didn't know what to do, but I finally ran out and went back into the house, up the stairs, and called my parents. I must say, during this whole process, Bobby was still barking. As I ran back into the house, I heard a thud on the ground and then the sound of footsteps running back into the woods, but he had no way to hide anymore because I had already seen him. My father woke up alarmed and grabbed the rifle and then ran out into the woods looking for the boy, but he didn't find him. So we called the police and filed a report. The next day, the boy was arrested, and while at the police station, he confessed that it was indeed him who broke into my house and also that he had been spying on me for months. The guy excused himself by saying that he liked me, but he just didn't have the courage to tell me, so he preferred to watch me from afar. That was the creepiest thing I'd ever heard in my life. However, having committed no physical assault against me and being a minor, he was acquitted with only a restraining order. Both my family and I were very outraged. This boy had broken into our property almost every night for months, invading our privacy, mine especially, and he only received a restraining order. That same day, my father removed the ladder next to my window. God only knows how many times this creepy kid spied on me while I was dressing, sleeping, or doing anything in my room. However, as small as our town is, I never saw him again. But since then, I put aluminized curtains in my room and practically never opened them. I live in the village of Utqiagvik, formerly known as Barrow, one of the northernmost places in Alaska. Living in this place is not for everyone, especially a girl. Almost anyone can live in the south, in towns like Haines or even Nome, as they are more adapted to common life. However, when you live far enough north as you do in this town, you experience something called polar night. For those unfamiliar with the term, it is a period of the year when you can stay in a constant night for up to 65 days. This is a complex phenomenon that not everyone is prepared for, and it was on a polar night that I had the scariest experience of my life. And I've seen some scary things in Alaska. I myself have had to get used to the polar night, that almost macabre darkness that descends on Alaska from November to January. It is a time of solitude, a period of hibernation in which I retreat to my home surrounded by silence and darkness. It is a time I devote to introspection, to self-reflection, but also to indulge in my favorite pastimes: reading, watching television, and working on my house. Every house here needs constant maintenance. Most of them are paneled with sheet metal of some sort, just to keep the dry rot away. If you don't keep up with the maintenance, you end up living in a hole. Life here is extremely difficult, so those of us who choose to live in this part of Alaska, it's because we truly love isolation and hard work. My sanctuary is my basement, the coziest place I have in the house, as it is easier to heat than the rest. I spend most of my time down there, surrounded by the comforting hum of the furnace and the glow of the television. It's kind of funny to think that it's underground where I find the most peace, where I can escape the oppressive thoughts that come with the dark, although the truth is that I have string lights and all sorts of different lighting for days when I'm feeling down, or if I really want to read something in the basement. One evening, many years ago, I was lounging on the couch watching a movie and fell asleep. I'm not sure how long I was unconscious, but when I woke up, I felt a hunger that made my stomach growl. I decided to go upstairs and start preparing myself a meal. Sometimes this can take a while, depending on the food I have on hand. We can't just run to the grocery store, as we don't get many supplies here, especially during the polar night. As I climbed the stairs, I felt the cold air rushing past my face, instantly chilling my skin. My feet felt numb from the cold, and I had on about 6 pairs of wool socks. I turned on the oven and preheated it to 350 degrees and began to prepare my meal. But as I was serving my food, I felt the need to use the bathroom. Plus, I wanted my slippers because my feet were freezing. I kept the upstairs at a moderate temperature, as the basement floor was really where I spent most of my time. There was easily a 20-degree difference. I went back downstairs and the darkness seemed to swallow me whole. I searched blindly for my light switch and the sudden brightness made me squint. I stepped gingerly over to the hand wash and then retrieved my slippers. As I was about to go back upstairs, I noticed something strange. The fur rugs seemed to be twisted, disarranged, as if they were almost alive. I know this sounds weird and is a strange thought, but polar nights put everyone in this strange mindset. I don't have paranoia, but I do have strange, detached thoughts like this. The polar night is a perfect breeding ground for all those types of strange subconscious escapes. Because of that, your neighbors get weird, animals act strange, dark thoughts accost you, and you can adopt creepy habits. I've always thought this would be the perfect scenario for these people with pagan ideologies who like rituals and such. I imagine weeks of pure darkness are valuable for the right person. I quickly shook off the feeling, telling myself it was just my imagination playing some kind of joke on me. But as I climbed the stairs, that uneasy feeling grew and grew. When I got to the kitchen, I knew something was wrong. I didn't notice at first, as it was one of those subtle things that caught your eye, but the brain did not. I looked at everything a couple of times before I finally realized that the food I partially left was now unwrapped. This is very strange. I also had some dry snacks, a small bag of Cheetos, but everything was empty. It was all just strange, and immediately put me on alert. I stood there with goosebumps and my mind wandering on so many things with all the possibilities. Whether or not I had really prepared the food, if it was some kind of dream, but if someone had taken it, who was it and why? The question swirled around my head, making my head spin. The darkness was closing in around me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting for me in the shadows. I had to get to the bottom of it. I put myself at risk of going crazy during the polar night. Mental health goes to hell during such prolonged darkness. It's understandable why, as I began to investigate my home, my heart was racing with every creak of the floorboards. The bathroom was the first place I checked. It was clear that someone had been in there during the hours I had been asleep, for the toilet paper roll was empty. The sink was wet. I felt a shiver run through my body as I realized that someone had been in my house using my things. Even my razor was somewhere else and the towel was crumpled on the floor. I moved into the spare room and that's when I saw him. A man sitting on the edge of my bed, eating the food I left on the counter. I stared at him, frozen in shock, as he looked up and stared at me with his head as if nothing was happening, as if it was all very ordinary. What the hell is going on? I thought. After my mind wandered for a while, I finally recognized him. He was one of the newest residents in town. He was just a couple of blocks away. His name was Mario. I had seen him several times, but now he was in my house, eating my food and acting like he was in his own house. I said an awkward, "Hello," but he just continued eating. "What are you doing here, Mario?" Now he looked up, looked around and replied, "Oh, you know, I had to come in for supplies, he said casually. I could ask him anything, and his answer would be just total nonsense. Even though I was scared, I tried to reason with him, but he just stared at me with his empty eyes. He seemed unaware of what was going on or who I was. I had no idea what to do or how to get him out of here, but I suddenly thought, what if he decides to become violent? Suddenly, I looked down at his feet. I saw that he was not wearing shoes. His toes had the beginnings of frostbite, and the swelling was starting to stretch all the way down to his foot. I felt a new wave of fear wash over me as I realized that Mario had been outside freezing for who knows how long. But now he was in my house, completely detached from reality. This was much worse than I thought. I realized that this could be very dangerous. At this point, I was terrified as I remembered that I had been in my kitchen and might have a knife somewhere. Mario was new in town, so no wonder he had gone crazy during the polar night. But I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to help him. I slowly started to leave the room to phone the police, but then Mario started screaming and my heart almost stopped. Now he was screaming frantically while holding his head with both hands, as if he was trying to keep his brain from exploding. The plate of food fell to the floor, which seemed to upset him even more. The sound was thunderous. I felt chills all over my body. I stood in shock, not knowing what to do as I continued to scream. It was a very eerie sound, the sound of a completely shattered mind. As I mentioned to you before, this is not unpredictable during the polar night. It is unnatural for a human being. It is not normal to go more than a day or two without seeing the sun, and we were already 2 weeks old. I ran out, but Mario lunged at me, slamming me against the wall with a force that knocked the wind out of me. I tried to pull back, but it was useless. I had his whole body imprisoning me and I couldn't move. I tried to beg him to calm down, but he kept screaming and slamming me against the wall. I had to do something and fast, or this deranged man was going to kill me. No sooner had this thought forged in my head than Mario grabbed me by the neck and slammed me against another wall and finally threw me against the floor. A few years ago, on my summer vacation before college, I planned a big solo excursion into the Alaskan backcountry. It was to be a long weekend of camping and fishing in different areas. My family agreed, as my father had spent many years in a small town outside of Kotzebue and grew up hunting and traveling all over the state for most of his youth. So I grew up hearing all of his amazing stories, and I couldn't wait to set out on my own adventure and see with my own eyes all that my dad talked about. It was a pretty basic outing. I love being in nature, but I knew not to take the Alaskan wilderness for granted. I didn't take a plane to the deep, isolated backcountry tree, or even hike to that off-the-radar spot. Instead, I chose to stay in some recreational areas known to campers and fishermen. I took some back roads to create a little distance between me and the others, but I was still a mile or two from the next campsite. At that point, I found a nice bay along a river just as my dad told me. It was a great place to fish. I guess something had changed over the last 30 years, because apparently there was no one around. But I could see some evidence of traffic, some wrappers from some knickknacks. There were also some bottle caps, plastic debris, nothing major, but enough to tell me that there were people there. I tried to fish, but in 3 hours I didn't catch a single fish. I could see why there was no one else fishing. I walked downstream for a couple of miles and found deep pools where I could see fish, but still didn't get a single bite. I changed my compass settings and still nothing. I started to think I was doing something wrong when I saw all the fish go totally crazy and then strike in all directions. This seemed a little strange to me because when the fish panic, they usually all go in the same direction, at least when they initially break. Shadows or things moving over the water will pass in one direction, so the fish will naturally swim away from anything that scares them. But that was not what I saw, as I could see them all floating freely against the water, drowning at the bottom of a pool, waiting for food to float towards them, and in the next second they were swimming with the boat upstream and downstream. Some even jumped straight out of the water. It was one of the strangest things I have ever seen a school of fish do in my life, like they had been hit with an electric collar or something, but I just chalked it up to bad luck and kept moving downstream. I had some luck before the end of the day and pulled a few out for dinner. As I moved downstream again, the trees around me opened up into this rolling meadow where the water had more room to spread out, creating eddies of water that flowed in different directions. I spent some time here checking my gear, fishing in the cistern, and generally enjoying the view. As the sun peeked through the clouds, some of the chill burned off, but I heard a strange noise. I heard it when I first entered the clearing, but it went away pretty quickly, so I thought my ears were ringing or something. But that same sound, I would hear it repeatedly over the next hour I was in that clearing, but only for a moment, and then it would cut out again. I looked around and thought maybe there might be someone or a cross bike somewhere further into the woods. It was so quiet that I was sure it had to be at least 5 or 6 miles away, whatever the case. I ended up losing interest. By now, the sun was setting, so there was a limited amount of daylight to do anything. So after securing my food, I continued a light hike for the rest of the afternoon, carried some gentle slopes, took some beautiful photos, and slowly made my way back upstream towards my campsite during. For a long time, I didn't see or hear anyone but that buzzing sound as I made my way back along the trail. But suddenly I thought I saw someone on the other bank sneaking behind some trees. I stopped for a moment and waited for him to come back out, as I was staying in a totally foreign place to me, and well, being sociable made sense. I wanted to dialogue about the river and any possible hotspots to fish, due to the fact that I was going to be here for the next few days. No one came out, although I looked in several directions, and even took a few steps back just to get a better view of the thicket. At that point, I started to feel a little weird. I was sure of what I had just seen and wondered, why would they be hiding from me? "Hello, Zrania," I shouted, trying to get the attention of whoever was around, but I got no response. With a whole new determination, I started to walk quickly back to camp. I kept looking over my shoulder for several more miles, but saw no one. I began to imagine more realistic scenarios inside my head. Maybe I didn't see anyone. More likely just some shadows or branches. Maybe even trees playing tricks on me. It might even have been a small animal coming to see me. There was a bend in the river ahead, so I took the time to analyze a bit of the terrain and just scan the trail behind me. Sure enough, I see everything moving as if someone or something is passing by, maybe 4 miles behind me. It is moving very, very quickly, trying not to move the bushes or make any noticeable sound. It was a little hard to look at him despite his movements, but he still didn't know I could see him. After a few more minutes, he looked up, waved at me, and then disappeared into the trees. I was shocked and wondering what the hell was that all about. It's strange, but the strangest part is that he looked like an unreasonable person, since especially from a distance, he seemed to have like a vest and equipment on his chest. Although maybe I could that he was a photographer or something, I don't know. Maybe that would explain all the pockets. It would also explain why he's so quiet. After what happened, I went on my way and walked a little faster, leaving that person super far away on the horizon. The rest of the afternoon and evening I spent as carefree as the smoke from my campfire. I cleaned the fish, stuffed it with garlic and butter, and had an exceptional dinner under the stars. I cleaned my teeth on one of the bones of a larger fish and soaked it all in. This made me think that my dad may have camped nearby as well. It was cool to be going through the same motions in the same place as my dad was. I wanted to rest early like I normally do, so I secured my camp and got in the tent for the night. I had a good crackling fire all night and a canvas tent big enough to stand in between a couple of trees. I listened to the crackling fire and fell asleep as the light faded. Next thing I know, I'm wide awake, but with a sense that something was wrong. I felt like something was triggering my sense of awareness even with my eyes closed. That's when I realized that I can see a flash of light coming out of my eyelids. My first thought was of that guy earlier, the river shining like a flashlight through the opening of my tent. Now my eyes snap open and I can't find any of it, even though I'm all alone and my tent is still closed. I can even see the fading glow of the charcoal bed of the campfire, and from that I can judge that it will be around midnight, maybe 2 o'clock in the morning. Apparently there is something else, a light a little ways away from my tent, maybe 18 feet away among the trees. I listen for any sound, but there is nothing. No engine, no footsteps. The road actually intersects with my camp in the opposite direction, so there wasn't even a place for a vehicle. But there was another factor. The light seemed to be coming straight down from the sky, a single solid pillar shooting vertically about 45 feet or so. I couldn't believe what I was seeing, and for a few minutes, I was sure I was dreaming, even wondering what the hell else it could be. Aliens? I doubt it. Then all trace of light disappears. It fades to black and that side of my tent is no longer illuminated. I've had quite a bit of experience out here in the woods, so I've carried a gun every time I've been out there since I first went to Alaska. I pack a 10mm pistol so I can protect myself from a predator if necessary from predators. This is a powerful weapon that has great firepower, so I kept it under my mattress. At the moment when I find myself asleep, the light appeared again in the sky, but this time, right around me. I was completely paralyzed when I saw that in the camp there was a solid column of light, maybe 30 feet in diameter and of an intense white color from end to end. I went into shock, completely paralyzed. Even with that weapon, I didn't know what to think, so I jumped out of my sleeping bag and just started to get dressed. I put on my boots, tucked the gun in my waistband, slowly unzipped the tent and peeked out with one eye. The light was so blinding that I couldn't see anything at all, even if I looked up. Whatever it was totally silent and as still as a surgeon. The light source never flickered as it hovered freely above me, but then I heard it again, the same noise. This time it was closer, but it was like a cutting noise that didn't allow me to do anything with that information. So this time I got out quickly. I wasted no time. I put on my sweater, tied my shoes, and headed for the tree line running fast. Since my camp was on an open trail, but the real forest was only a few meters away. The thicker trees would provide me with better cover from whatever was above. I crashed into some trees but didn't stop to clean myself up. The branches shredded me from head to toe, but they were much less of a threat than the light in the sky. I could see a hill to my left and what looked like a rocky mountain right in front of me. I had no flashlight and had no interest in breaking my ankle there, so I chose to stumble over the rocks on the hillside in the dark. It was too risky, especially with how fast I was going, as the light was moving too fast and was following me. I got almost halfway up and found a large oak tree with thick, totally dead branches among the other trees. These seemed easier to climb, so I reached out and pulled. I climbed on the thin gray branches, but kept climbing until I was at least 15 feet in the air. As I climbed, that same pillar of light comes alive above my camp again. From where I was at that moment, you can see part of my camp and part of my truck, as well as the open flap of my tent. The light floats and I can see it is coming from a single point of origin, but it is so dark I can't see what it is, and then it begins to move following the way I ran into the trees. As it cuts over the tops of the trees along the road, it makes the light go out again. Now I'm in the tree and I can actually hear it moaning, and not just buzzing. At this point, I'm stuck. I have no options, so I pull out my gun and just wait. I'm willing to drop every bullet on that thing no matter what. A few minutes later, at the base of the mountain where I turned off the main road, the light stayed there for quite some time. Approximately after about 10 minutes it went out, and then it started circling around in the woods. In fact, I could hear it buzzing next to me a couple of times, just above the oak tree I was in. I was hoping that by getting off the ground and up a tree, maybe whatever it was wouldn't be able to see me, and it looked like I was right. As you can imagine, my knuckles were white on my gun as I watched the light go on and off periodically. Then I heard someone yell, and realized it was the same greeting I yelled toward the river earlier. It wasn't in my voice, obviously, but just a call. It was almost as if someone was mocking me. I climbed a little higher up in the tree and just waited for the sunrise, waited for about an hour and ran down at the very moment I saw the sky change color, arrived at my camp and immediately gathered everything and got out of there as soon as possible. When I arrived at the other camp, I met some campers who told me that they used to stay in that area. Then I told them what happened and they assured me that they had stayed there many times, but they had never seen any kind of light like the one I explained to them. They heard the noise, but nevertheless, they said that sometimes it came and went in the afternoon. Very strange, but nothing like the answer I was looking for. The end of the trip came. I returned home and started telling my father about it. He was really perplexed by the situation. He had no idea what to make of it all, but deduced that it might be a military operation they were conducting in that area. But none of us could imagine why they would come to bother a lone camper, someone who probably has a gun or two and no one to ask for help. Years later, I talked to a group of people who had a similar experience. They were camping in the Four Corners area, in a small area of the woods, when their camp was lit up the same way mine was, but they didn't run away from their camp like I did. They just waited until it was gone. One of them went to the ranger service the next day and told them what he saw. It was then that they explained to him that there was illegal farming in the area, and that the local authorities were using drones to detect the farms at night and mark the location so they could raid them. He then told me that the operator probably must have mistaken my camp for something related to narcotics cultivation. We compared notes and almost everything was the same. The drone, the silence, the overwhelming light, the way it floated like a ghost from place to place. I don't know who would have had a drone inside the Alaskan wilderness at that time, but they scared the hell out of me. What I really wish I knew is whether it was a civilian or government program, and I wonder if you have any photos of me from that night in Kotzebue.